Make some progress tonight through the chapter and hopefully wrap chapter 20 up here in Revelation. A lot to look at tonight. So, given a kind of a preview or an overview of what we talked about last week, the 1,000-year reign of Christ took place through verses 1 through 4, where it was spoken of. Those part of the first resurrection, who were the saved, were resurrected, and then those part of the second death, which were considered the unsaved, were basically recognized that had no power, and that their eternity was to be judged here in a few more verses we'll look at tonight here in just a minute. Okay, so now moving past the millennial reign or the millennial age of Christ into the release of Satan. We talked a little bit last week about what that might have looked like, and we're not going to spend really any time on that tonight, I don't guess, but what life would be like during this 1,000-year reign of Christ. No Satan, no demons, no demonic influence, okay? Doesn't mean no sin, because I believe that they're still on a carnal earth, a carnal planet. Even though you have Christ reigning, there is still those that are lost, okay? But can you imagine, and I think that, and I'm going to go ahead and speak this because I believe it is so true. I think we take for granted how much influence the devil and his demons have in this world. We put blame on so many things other than where blame should reside. I think often and the devil, I guess, is always this way. He never gets credit for a lot of things, but the reality is he is active. Demons are real, right? Do you agree? I hope you agree, because they are. I mean, the Bible didn't just talk about them just so that we can fantasize about them. They're the real. They even believe in God. And so we see that, and so we think about this 1,000-year reign of Christ, and it must be a significant, awesome experience for the believer if there were believers there and that have been surrounded to in this first resurrection. But now, moving beyond that, okay, the promise, if you will, of the last part of verse 6. Well, no, it's not in the last part of verse 6. Where is that at? Where it talks about, it's in verse 2. That he sees the dragon, then the ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He then threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed over it to keep him from deceiving the nations anymore until 1,000 years are ended. After that, he must set free for a short time. Must be set free for a short time. That's in verse 3. Now, so here we are at the end or past the millennial reign of Christ into the release of Satan, spoken about in verse 2 and 3. Look in verse 7 now. I want to go ahead and read 7 through 10. Okay? Revelation 27 through 10. Excuse me for this cold that I have, still struggling with, as I have sniffly nose tonight. All right, verse 7. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. All right, so the funny thing is, the final doom of Satan comes in one simple paragraph. I love that. I really do, because Satan has always longed for such dominion and such power and such notoriety that in just a few verses here, 4 verses, says, oh, by the way, he tries and then he fails and then he's done away with. Okay? So I think that's pretty cool. No earthquakes, no lightning, just that. Okay? Now, there have been known of three perspectives about this impending war, okay? So we see him gathering. We'll talk about this here in just a moment. But he's released. He goes to the four corners of the earth. That significantly represents all around the entire planet. Gog and Magog, basically those who have been prepared to come against God. And so he gathers them for battle. And it says they're innumerous. They are like sand on the seashore. So these three perspectives about this impending war, this is what you find in some of the commentaries. Number one is, it is what it says. Gog and Magog actually refers to this specific battle, okay, separate from Armageddon, okay. The second view is the battle of Armageddon the same one that's chronicled at the end of chapter 16, but it's an overlap. We've talked about that before, okay? That's a view, okay? Keep this in mind. I'm not teaching this, but that is one of the views, that this is a close-up of this period taking place. The third perspective of this impending war is this. It's a combination of the first two, and is a final conflict occurring at different times with an interim period of the 1,000-year reign of Christ. That's even more far-fetched, I believe. In other words, he's saying it's the same battle, but it started before the reign of Christ at the end of the tribulation, and it finishes up after the reign of Christ. I really believe that Armageddon has taken place, even though it wasn't much of a battle. And I say that this impending war, and I say impending because it never really was a war. Okay, based on what we read right here, this is not a war that will take place. Okay, but no one really knows. You have heard more than likely, if you've been in the Bible, if you studied Revelation, the places or the words Gog and Magog. They are first referenced in Ezekiel 38 and 39. If you were to go to some of the Old Testament prophets, Joel, Ezekiel, several that reference to end times, then you'll see some of those references to what we've been reading about. In Ezekiel 38 and 39, though, it really gives some specifics. So what I want to do is I want us to hold our place here in Revelation, and I want us to turn to Ezekiel 38 and 39. We haven't really done this much, but I want to dig into what these chapters say, just so that we can get an idea of a prophecy that was spoken thousands of years, who knows how many thousands of years before this actually takes place, because it hasn't taken place yet. All right, so we don't even know when that'll be, but we do know that it is the Word of God and it will take place. But prophet Ezekiel spoke of this, and we'll pick it up in verse 8, Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38 and 39. And if you'll bear with me, I want to read 38 beginning in verse 1. I said verse 8. We'll start in verse 1 and we'll read through 39, chapter 39, verse 8. All right, not too much to read. So let's go ahead and start this. Ezekiel 38, verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. Also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gather about you, and take command of them. After many days you will be called to arms. In future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolated. They have been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. You and all your troops and the many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. Let me stop right there for just a moment. If we go back and look at verse 5 of Revelation 20, you don't have to, unless you're there, and you can flip over and can go back to Ezekiel. Well, I want to go back to that. It's talking about the rest of the dead not come to life until the 1,000-year reign was ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who have part in this first resurrection. These are believers. These are the believers gathering back to the city of God, which is considered Jerusalem. All right, now go back to Ezekiel, and he's calling them. All right, this prophecy against God. He's calling them to go and look at these people. Look in verse 10 again. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. Those are the people of God. Okay? Why are they living without gates? Why are they living without walls? Because they've trusted in God. Okay? They have no need for those things. How many of you are ready to not ever have to lock your doors again? Yeah? On your car? On your house? You know? Well, times have changed, haven't they? I know, that's right. So look in verse 12, in verse 38 of Ezekiel. It says, I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. Sheba, and that was the people speaking that. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all her villages will say to you, have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hordes to loot, to carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder? Therefore, son of man, prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the sovereign Lord says, in that day when my people Israel are living in safety. I underline that in my Bible. When my people are living in safety, will you not take notice of it? Will you not come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde, a mighty army? You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, O Gog, I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know me when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. This is interesting because it sounds like it's an impending attack on God's people, okay? That these things are about to take place. Look in verse 17. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Are you not the one I spoke of in former days by my servants, the prophets of Israel? At that time they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. This is what will happen in that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment upon him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness. And I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, this is chapter 39. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around and drag you along. I will bring you from the far north and send you against the mountains of Israel. Then I will strike you your bow from your left hand and make your bow from your left hand and make your arrows drop from your right hand. On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all the troops and the nations with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open fields, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in safety in the coastlands, and they will know that I am the Lord. Okay, sorry, a couple more verses. I will make known my holy name among my people Israel. I will no longer let mine holy name be profaned, and the nations will know that I, the Lord, am the Holy One of Israel. It is coming. It will surely take place, declares the sovereign Lord. This is the day I have spoken of. All right. I wanted to read that because, and Virgil, thank you for bringing me these Kleenexes. I wanted to read that because of the significance of what it's basically verifying is going to take place here in Revelation chapter 20. Okay, we can see this and we can know that it's going to take place based on this, but in the time frame on which it's supposed to take place. Now, I say that because a lot of your declared revelation revealers, I don't know how else to call them, people who really know the book of Revelation or who declare that they know the book of Revelation. I'm not calling them saying that they don't, but there are a lot of people that are very certain of things that aren't real clear in here. One of them being Gog and Magog. You've probably heard Gog and Magog have been represented, Russia, China, some of the nations from the north, okay, because it does say that they'll gather them from the north, okay, and it could be that's where they are located, but those who specifically say this has to be this way, again, be leery of things that when people say that this is exactly what it is, has to be that way, no other way, because we don't know, it hasn't happened yet. All right, so you have Gog and Magog that's referenced. Now, how many of you know what Ezekiel 37 talks about? Anyone? The chapter before these two. The Valley of the Dry Bones. If you know the story, okay, and if you don't, you need to go back and read the story. It's an amazing story. But if you know the story, then you know it's this vast valley that is full of basically Israelite soldiers, an army that had been defeated, and the bones start rattling. The prophet hears the bones rattling, and the bones come together, and the sinews and the muscles and the skin all standing erect, and then the breath is blown into them. They become a vast army of God. This is representative, I think, of what we're talking about here. Okay, even though I guess it's just, you could say this, it's representative of that resurrection, okay? The resurrection of the believer. All right. Probably spent way too much time on that from my end. So, reference to verse 5 of chapter 20 in Revelation. And so, here we go back in Revelation, okay? Yes, sir. Yeah.
And to me here it's emphasizing the power of the Word of God and His preached. It may be a cold and dead people, but when the Word of God is preached in power and Spirit, then they come alive spiritually.
That's right. That's exactly right. All right. So let's look in verse 8 of chapter 20. Let's see, and they will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of their Gog and Magog to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They march across the breadth of the earth and surround the camp of God's people, the city He loves. Okay, so here we see them. Basically, they march to the place. They are in the area, and we call this. Most people identify this as Jerusalem because it is the city of God. And I want you to think about this. It's the city He loves. Okay. Psalms tells us to do what? Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Okay? Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And I think it's because there will always be, Satan will always be trying to do away with God's city that he loves. I think they will always be have a bullseye on them, okay? And whether it be from a Muslim nation, whether it be from a communist nation, whether it be from a paganist nation, there's always some sort of attack that people don't like about Israel. And it's the enemy. We know it's the devil. And that's why I think it's so important, and I know many of you, hopefully all of you, realize how important it is for the United States to be allies with Israel. I think that's the whole purpose of that over the years, okay? So, and then it goes on, talks about the fire from heaven came and devoured. There was really no war that took place. And then the devil's final placement, okay? Verse 10 says, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. It's over. Okay? The final, you can't even say resting place. The final destination of Satan is there. All right, so let's move on. Let's see what time it is. Let's move on to verse 11 through 15. Okay? Let me read verse 11 through 15. It says, then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what he had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, so going back to the beginning of this little section, we have the one that is seated on the throne. Okay, what we know about this one that was seated on the throne is he is omniscient, he is omnipotent, and he is omnipresent. And look at that, and the reason why I say that is because he was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, and yet there was no place for them. Can you flee from God's presence? You can't. You cannot. Word of God tells us that. We know that. I know that from experience. I cannot hide from God. As much as sometimes I've wanted to, I know I can't. And I'm thankful for that. And so this shows his presence or his omnipotence and his omniscience and his omnipresence right here in this place. So we know it was God. We feel certain it was God who was seated on this throne that was bringing this judgment, okay? Couldn't escape his presence. Somewhat of a resurrection of the ungodly was happening here to face judgment, okay? And I kind of use that phrase loosely, resurrection, because we always affiliate that with those who are believers in Christ. But what was happening here, they were being brought before the throne, being brought before God for judgment. Now what we see here in this little paragraph are basically two judgments that were given. Okay, two judgments that were given. The first judgment is based on things recorded in these books, and it says plural books. So I don't know what these books look like, or what. Obviously, they kept record of everything that they had done. All right, these were the naughty list books. If you're talking Santa Claus here, there's no nice. It's all naughty and all the things that they have done wrong. Okay, they're being judged on those things, and so that's one of the judgments. The other judgment is based on their names not written in the book of life, meaning that they had rejected Christ. So two judgments. They're being judged on their deeds, okay? They're the evil, the worldliness, the flesh deeds, and they were being judged on their rejection of the gospel of Christ, okay? There are no believers at the great white throne of judgment. Everybody hear that? Okay, it doesn't have any mention of any believers at the great white throne of judgment. Okay, believers' judgment is referred to as the judgment seat of Christ. Okay, you may know that. As a matter of fact, scriptures tell us that. Turn over to Romans chapter 14. Romans chapter 14, verse 10. It says, "You then, why do you judge your brother? Or why do you look down on your brother? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat." Okay? And then flip over to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10. "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive what is due him for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad." This is a different judgment than the great white throne of judgment that we're looking at here. Okay? And then look at verse 14 and 15 again. It says, "Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into that lake of fire." Okay? So he's talking about that second death. Go back to, over here to verse 6. Again, it says, "Blessed and holy are those who have part in the first resurrection. The second death has no power over them." So another confirmation there were no believers, that there will be no believers at the great white throne of judgment. Okay? Any questions about that? All right. We have just a few more minutes left, but does anybody have any comments they want to share on those particular Satan's doom and the dead being judged? All right, because I don't want to start chapter 21 yet. I do, but I don't, because we got a lot to cover in chapter 21. All right, anything else? You're all quiet? Tired of listening to me snort? All right. Well, if there's not anything else, then let's close with a word of prayer. I appreciate your patience going through the Word, and hopefully there's a nugget for you to grab a hold of there. I think there is always that reminder of God's power and His authority and His sovereignty, knowing that He set all of this into position and to transition for your benefit and for my benefit, for those of us who follow Him, for those of us who believe in Him, for those of us who live eternally with Him. You know, that's the glorious thing. He didn't just feel sorry for us and rescue us. God created us. He created Adam in the very beginning that He might have fellowship with us. So keep that in mind in your relationship with God as you walk with Him on a daily basis. Is that fellowship with Him, okay? It was an act of mercy, but it wasn't just because He felt sorry for you. It's because He wanted you to experience what He created you for. And that's glorious to think about. If you really put some thought in it, that is really glorious to think about. Brother Dole?
Thinking all this, let's be thinking about, the other line, the Scripture says, "Unless a man be holy, he shall not see God."
Yeah, yeah.
That's what a lost and dying world needs to hear, because Satan continues to try to dilute down the true power of God in His Word.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right, guys, thank you so much. Joe, would you close us with a word of prayer?